All right, so first one here, we're looking to factor. And so on this, first step to factoring is GCF. So as we look at this, when there's numbers and variables, deal with each portion separately. So I want to deal with the numbers. So as I look at this, 2, 12, and 18 have a 2 in common. And then look at your x's. We have x to the fourth, x, and x squared. The most amount of x's you can pull out is just one x. And then same thing with the y's. We have a y cubed, y squared, and y squared. So we can pull out 2 y's, which is y squared. Then we go back and check and see what's left over. So 2 divided by 2 is 1. X to the fourth, pull out 1x is x cubed. Y cubed, pull out a y squared. That leaves me with 1y. 12 divided by 2 is 6. 1x pulled out, cancels that x out. Y squared pulled out, cancels out the y squared. 18 divided by 2 is 9. X squared, pull out 1x, leaves us with an x, and then y squared pulled out leaves us with no y's. And so then our answer here is B. All right, number 2, we have 2 terms. So if there's 2 terms and we're factoring, we should think what type of factoring? Difference of squares? Yeah. So we go, what squares give us x squared, which is x, and what squares give us 144, that is 12. So you get x 12, x 12, and then 1 negative, 1 positive. So that'd be A. Hey, number 3, we're solving. Hey, so we still need to get it set equal to 0, which it is in this. Check for a GCF. There is no GCF, so we're going to factor. So we'll Xbox this. A times C is 25. And then B is negative 10. Negative 5, negative 5. We do our box. And we get 25x squared and 1. Negative 5x and negative 5x. So we get negative 1, 5x, 5x, and 1, which then gives us 5x plus 1 squared equals 0, or you can write it as 5x plus 1 times 5x plus 1. Take square root, and you get 5x plus 1 equals 0. When you solve, subtract 1, divide by 5, and you get x equals 1/5, which is A. Alright, so going back here, this should be, so that changes this down here. That's a minus 1. So I'm going to add 1, which is why I get my positive 1 there. Thank you. Hey, so on number 4, it says volleyball player sets the ball in the air, and the height of the ball after t seconds is given in feet by our equation h equals negative 16t squared plus 12t plus 6. A teammate wants to wait until the ball is 8 feet in the air before she spikes it. When should the teammate spike the ball? So we have to identify what we have. On this, our equation's fully filled in. And then the 8 feet, remember the h in our equation is your final height, which is your h. So then our equation is going to be 8 equals negative 16t squared plus 12t plus 6. And then we want to get it set equal to 0, so we subtract 8. And you get 0 equals negative 16t squared plus 12t minus 2. Then from here we want to factor, so GCF. And since our A is currently negative with that negative 16, we want to pull out a negative as well with that. So I pull out a negative 2, that becomes 8. T squared minus 6t, and then plus 1. So then we factor that, and we get 8 and negative 6, which is negative 4 and negative 2. Then we do our box, and we get 8t, negative 4t, negative 2t, and 1. So factor out, this is negative 1 and 4t and 2t and negative 1 as well. So 0 equals negative 2, 4t minus 1, and 2t minus 1. Solve those, so 0 equals negative 2, which doesn't have an impact. 4t minus 1 and 2t minus 1. Add 1, divide by 4, and you get t equals 1 over 4 and 1 over 2, which in this case, both of those answers work because they're positive. Remember, when you're solving for t, if you have a negative, when we put it back in the context, we would not choose the negative as a solution. We just choose the positive. This one's both positive, so we're good with that. All right, number 5. All right, so solve by factoring. There is no GCF, so we're going to Xbox. 2 times 6 is 12. And we get 7 there, so that becomes 3 and 4. 2x squared, 3x, 4x, and 6. So I get 2, I get x, I get 2x, and 3. Set those factors equal to 0, and then set each factor itself equal to 0. Subtract 2 and you get x equals negative 2. Subtract 3 and divide by 2 and you get x equals negative 3 halves. So we get B. Alright, number 6, another factor completely. Now on this one, as you guys were working through this yesterday, a lot of us were making this harder than what it is. You did do Xbox correctly, but very first step to factoring is GCF. So if you factor out that 3 initially, you get x squared minus 9x plus 20, which now those numbers are a whole lot smaller. So then when I Xbox, we get 20 and negative 9, which is negative 5 and negative 4. To our box, we get x squared, negative 5x, negative 4x, and then 20 there. So we get negative 4 and x, and negative 5. So x minus 4 equals 0, and x minus 5 equals 0. So x equals 4 and 5, which gives us C. Number 7. Now, some of us on this one struggled a little bit because it is easier to subtract the 3x squared over, but it's easier if we keep our A positive. So in this case, it'd be easier to add 5x and add the 2. So that way you get 3x squared plus 5x plus 2. None of those are like terms, so don't combine those together. Then from there, we can Xbox it. So we get 6 and 5. That is 3 and 2. Do our box. We get 3x squared. So plus 2. 2 3x, and 2x. So I get 1x, 3x, and 2. So x plus 1 equals 0. 3x plus 2 equals 0. So then x equals negative 1 and negative 2 thirds. So that's A. Alright, 8. Simplifying 180. When we are just taking the square root of something, we're going to break it down into our factors. So I get 9 and 20. 9 breaks down to 3 and 3. 20 is 4 and 5. And 4 is 2 and 2. It's the square root, so we're looking for groups of 2. So I have a group of 2 3s and a group of 2 2s. So for each of those, I pull one out. So 1 3 and 1 2. And then I have a 5 left on the inside. 3 times 2 is 6 root 5. So that is C. Hey, we are not solving, so it is not plus or minus. It is just the positive one. Alright, number 9. Again, in order to solve, we need to get everything on one side, get it set equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract 4x, which I can combine there. And that gives me x squared, and then I'm going to add 18x, which I can combine, which gives me 5x minus 24 equals 0. Then we can xbox, and 8 and negative 3 multiplies negative 24 and adds to 5. Box from there, and we get x squared, 8x, negative 3x, and negative 24. So we get 8x, x, and negative 3. So x plus 8 equals 0, and x minus 3 equals 0. So x equals negative 8 and 3. So that's A. Okay, so number 10, two terms. When we see two terms, we should think difference of squares. What squares to give us x squared? That's x. What squares to give us 36 is 6. And then just make one positive, one negative, so then our answer on that one would be C. Hey, 11, we are factoring three terms, so I'm going to xbox. A times C is 100. I get negative 20 on the bottom, so that is negative 10 and negative 10. To our box, and we had 4z squared, 25, negative 10z, and negative 10z. So I get a negative 5 and 2z, 2z, and negative 5. So 2z minus 5 times 2z minus 5. Alright, 12. So we already saw this one in just straight factoring. Now we're doing it factoring by solving. And so we're going to go x minus 12 and x plus 12. When we set each of those equal to 0, we get x equals positive 12 and negative 12. So then that would be B and D on that one. Hey, 13, another just simplify. So we break down the 32, which breaks down to 8 and 4. 8 breaks down to 4 and 2. 4 is 2 and 2. So I have two different groups of 2. So 2 times 2, and then square root 2, which is A, 4 root 2. Now solving by square root, one, if you're told, it makes it obvious which one you're going to do. But if there is no just bx term, like we have ax squared plus bx plus c, if there's just a squared term, you can solve by square root. So what we want to do is get our squared term by itself, which in this case our squared term is just the x squared. So what I want to do is I'm going to add 9 which gives me 3x squared equals 33. Divide by 3, and x squared equals 11. Then to get rid of the square, we square root it. And remember, when we're solving, we get plus or minus the square root of 11 in this case, so that would be A and B. All right, number 4. So now this time, our squared term is this whole x plus 10. So anything outside of that, I then want to get by itself. So I'm going to divide by 4, and we get x plus 10 squared equals 6. Squared term is by itself, which means now we can take the square root, and we get x plus 10 equals plus or minus the square root of 6. Subtract 10, and x equals negative 10 plus or minus the square root of 6. So that gives me A and D. Hey, 16, another solve by square root. Our squared term is x minus 9, which is already by itself, so we can go ahead and just take the square root. And we get x minus 9 equals plus or minus 8. A lot of you were forgetting this one because you had an actual integer number instead of the square root. And then you guys were adding 9, but what you really need to do here is write two equations. X minus 9 equals positive 8, and x minus 9 equals negative 8. Add 9, and you get 17. Add 9, and you get 1. So C and E. Alright, 17. Rocket is launched from a hill 55 feet high. The rocket launches with an upwards velocity of 156 feet per second. The rocket crashes in the roof of a house 15 feet high. How long was the rocket in the air before crashing into the house? Use the equation h equals negative 16t squared plus vt plus s. So this one, unlike the last one, the equation is not filled in, so we have to identify our portions. I'll come back to the h. They already gave us the negative 16t squared. Our velocity is our v, which they point out very nicely for us, so it's 156t. Now s is your starting height. Okay, so your starting height is 55 in this one, and then your ending height is your h, which is 15. So some of us, as I was walking around yesterday when we were working on this, we're flipping those. So make sure you get your starting height is where the object starts at. H is your ending height. That's where the object ends. So then we want to get set equal to 0, so we subtract 15. And we get 0 equals negative 16t squared plus 156t plus 40. GCF, again our A is negative, so I'm going to pull out a negative along with my GCF, which is 8. And I get 2t squared minus, so 8 is not our GCF. Try 4 for me then, please. 39, okay. So that's 4, this becomes 39t, and this becomes a negative 10. Hey, don't forget when you pull out that negative that you change all the signs all the way through. So I'm going to X box this now. So A times C is negative 40, B is negative 39. So then we get negative 40 and 1. Do the box. We get 4t squared, negative 10, negative 40t, and 1t. So we get negative 10, we get t, we get 4t, and we get 1. So t minus 10 equals 0, 4t plus 1 equals 0, so we get t equals 10, and t equals negative 1/4. But when we put this back into the context of the problem, negative time does not work So then that one does not work, and our answer is just t equals 10 on that one. Hey, 18, we're going to solve by the square root. Again, we want to get everything besides the square by itself. So subtract 6, and we get 6x squared equals 216. Divide by 6, and x squared equals 36. Take square root, and x equals plus or minus 6. So then B and D. Hey, 19. Want to move everything over so it's set equal to 0. I'm going to add 3v squared. And that gives me 7v squared. I'm going to subtract 7v. That gives me 40v, and then plus 25. Go ahead and Xbox this. So 7 times 25 is 175, and then we get 40. So that's 35 and 5. So 7v, 35v, 5v, and 25. That gives us 5 here, 7v, v, and 5. So 7v plus 5 equals 0, and v plus 5 equals 0. V equals negative 5 over 7 and negative 5. So that gives us C and D. All right, 20. Now, interestingly enough, this is one of the ones, the next two are the ones that a lot of us struggle on the most. Yeah, remember this whole time, what we've been doing is we've been factoring to get it to this so that we can set those equal to 0. So these are already factored for you, so you can set each factor equal to 0. Add 8 and you get p equals 8 there. Subtract 6 and divide by 2 and you get p equals negative 3. So B and C. Now 21 is similar, set up slightly different because it's not already set equal to 0 and they tell you to find the zeros. Remember that finding the zeros just means we substitute 0 in for our y value, in this case our f of x value, and then it becomes just like the previous one. So I get negative 2 equals 0, 3x plus 4 equals 0, and x minus 5 equals 0. Well, negative 2 does not equal 0. Subtract 4 and divide by 3 and you get x equals negative 4 over 3. Add 5 and you get x equals 5. So you get B and E. Now 22, a couple ways you can go about doing this one. You can, one, divide the whole thing by 3. And then you get x squared minus 4x equals 12. And then from here we would subtract the 12 over. And you get x squared minus 4x minus 12 equals 0. Which then we xbox, so we get negative 12 and negative 4. So that's negative 6 and 2. So we get 2 there, we get x there, and negative 6 there. So x plus 2 equals 0, and x minus 6 equals 0. So x equals negative 2 and 6. Now the other way you could have done this is what we'll do on 23, is you could distribute the 3 in, so you get 3x squared minus 12x. You would subtract the 36 over, and then you'd factor out a GCF of 3. All right, last one here. So we're going to distribute which a lot of us did initially correct. We got 3x squared. And then here I saw a lot of us write 6. That is 6x. Make sure we distribute correctly. We get 25x here and negative 20 there. Move everything over, so I'm going to subtract 25x, which gives us 3x squared minus 19x equals negative 20. Add the 20. That gives us 3x squared minus 19x plus 20 equals 0. X box. So we get 60 and negative 19, which is negative 15 and negative 4. 3x squared and 20. Negative 15x and negative 4x. My GCF, I get negative 5 and x. 3x and negative 4. So x minus 5 equals 0. 3x minus 4 equals 0. So x equals 5 and positive 4/3 once you solve those. So that is A and B.